I see the thumbs up in the back, which means we're ready. So I want to welcome everyone to The Dig. I told everyone last week I got the best compliment. I met the vice president of the national, I guess it's the International Slovenian Society. We were out visiting with Dr. Bartolo out at the Research Institute, and she stopped for a moment after I started talking and she said, "You're Mr. Dig." So I guess it's my nickname now, but it's been a lot of fun.
Mr. Dig.
So, and I've been waiting for this particular presentation because I had kind of an insider's perspective on the making of the documentary, which of course was the Great Pueblo Flood. And so that was a lot of fun. And this is the first time we've had, well, we had Bree Poppin and Wade Broadhead. We had two people up on the stage. But now we've got Sam Ebersole and Justin Bregar. So first a shout out, and a real shout out to the entire, Gina is in the back there. She's representing the Senate family. And she's doing triple time today thanks to some IT issues, which are beyond everyone's control. But she's been a trooper all night. And then, of course, tonight's an interesting night because the two people who, well, Justin leading and Sam has been here almost every Wednesday night, but they're on the stage now. So who's running the camera? So Jeff, of course, who's been working with Justin, he's working one of the cameras. And then Scott Jones, who is, you know, one of our amazing, he's like a legacy, he's a legend here in Pueblo when it comes to filmmaking and with Rocky Mountain PBS and all of those great film production companies. And I think Jane is actually back there in one of the seats too. Sarah Jane. So, no, this is exciting. And I think we've got Emery Collinson is here too, who's with Rocky Mountain PBS. So a shout out, because without Rocky Mountain PBS, we would not have had that documentary. And I do have some really important announcements, which I'm just going to announce really quickly. So when you came in, I asked you to leave your name. That's for our dear friends at the Sacred Bean. And that's that fabulous vintage VW bus that can be found all over town. And if you go to Facebook and just put in Sacred Bean, you'll find out where they are. I usually like to find them on Mondays and Tuesdays at Renewed Wholesale, which is right across from the library in Mesa Junction. And if you haven't tried two of their drinks, one of them on a hot day is their guava sage lemonade. And it's amazing. But I just tried yesterday morning their Petitza latte. Now, if that isn't a Pueblo drink, a Petitza latte, but I'll be honest with you, it's not sweet, it's not bitter, and it almost tastes like someone just baked a fresh loaf of Petitza and they sliced it and they mixed it in the drink. So it's a real winner. And she has some other really nice new drinks, and she has a new espresso machine. So we're going to give away a lot of those free things. I also want to just mention that there's two events coming up. For those of you that have been following Keating Junior High School, and this is really exciting because Pueblo is really on the map now, not only just nationally, but internationally, for what we're doing in the realm of adaptive reuse. So that's about taking our historic buildings, not even just historic buildings, but any building that's been oftentimes forgotten, abandoned, underutilized, and Keating Junior High School, of course, right across the street from Central High School. I mean, that whole area, I mean, that campus is gorgeous. So we have a team over here, Corrine Kaler and Carla Hendrickson, who are really a big part of that. But on October the 7th, it's a Thursday, at Blowback Gallery, which is in the Grove. If you haven't been to Blowback, I live right next door, which is right next door to Water Tower Place, the old Alpha Beta meatpacking plant. But if you have not been to the gallery yet, this is where they're going to host it. It has the big art sign, A-R-T, and if you haven't noticed, if you're coming south on I-25, there's a huge new billboard that says, "Dare to Detour." And at the bottom, of course, it says clean restrooms too, which is great. I remember driving in Arizona, New Mexico, and all of those great restaurants, they always said clean restrooms. So, but the Blowback Gallery is going to be hosting it on October 7th from 4:30 to 7. And this is to raise funds and awareness to save and repurpose the historic Keating School. So tickets are $20, well worth it, because they've got music, food trucks, drinks, silent and live auction, memorabilia exhibit. They're going to be premiering a video about Keating's past and its future. So RSVP, you can get more information. I have these flyers in the back, so be sure to take one. And then another big announcement is Damon Days. So Damon Runyon is one of our great Puebloans who lived here. And Damon Days is going to be taking place beginning, actually it's a whole series of events starting September 18th, and it goes all the way through, there's quite a few days here, till the end of October. So I have this flyer too for Damon Days, so you'll have an opportunity to really dig into some of those really exciting events. So now, I'm gonna do what I usually do, is read from the actual bios of our two speakers. Yes, I do. No, I have to. This is exciting. So, drum roll, there we go. Thank you, Carla. We're gonna get hit by the union now. You gotta be careful here. Okay, so Sam Ebersole, right here to my left. Sam Ebersole was a professor in the Media Communications Department at CSU-Pueblo from 1990 until 2021. His areas of interest and expertise were media effects, television documentary, audience research, and social media. And I think he asked me to correct this afterwards. He still is very much interested in that. There you go. I know, I told him when he retired, I said, I came to Pueblo at the wrong time for you because you're never going to retire. But he is an avid fly fisherman, so you may not find him around, but he will be in a stream somewhere. So, and water too, I know, is a passion for Sam. Professor Ebersole authored a textbook, several book chapters, numerous scholarly articles, and has produced several documentary films for cable and broadcast. Since 2000, he has been a NATPE faculty fellow, an International Radio and Television Society fellow, a Berglund Center for Internet Studies fellow, and a recipient of the Stephen H. Coulter Award for Excellence in Communications Education. For his work with NBC Sports during the 1988 Summer Olympic Games, Ebersole was awarded 2 Emmy Awards. A hand for that. You really should have done mine first. So Justin Bregar, who we need to give a hand because Justin has been doing all of this for the dig, which is extraordinary. So, and it's not just for each and every Wednesday for the live stream, but you know, we're working with students and teachers and faculty now at all levels to make these actual oral histories, these stories actually available in a curriculum format. So it's really exciting to see that continue. So Justin Bregar is an award-winning videographer and multimedia designer who has produced video content for a wide variety of clients, including the United States Air Force, Rocky Mountain PBS, and Colorado State University. From 2008 to 2013, Justin was an assistant professor in the Media Communications Department at CSU-Pueblo, and he continues to teach video and audio production courses as an adjunct member of the faculty. A native of Pueblo, Justin resides there with his wife and son. And what's your dog's name? Griffin. Awesome dog, too. You forgot Griffin. But the other thing I want to mention, too, at Water Tower Place, we're redesigning the entire second floor, which is what we're calling our storytelling makerspace. And it'll be the first of its kind in the world. And Justin, I know, we've been sitting around working out the floor plans, the design from pre-production, post-production, from podcasting studios to recording studios to editing bays for pre-production, post-production, a white site. I mean, everything you can imagine that's necessary to do a professional production. Whether you're doing something for a small business or whether you're doing something major, a full feature, film or documentary, reality TV, we want to make sure that Pueblo has those resources. And as I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, I'm hoping when I return from Los Angeles next week, I'm going to visit the Knuckles grandchildren and great-grandchildren again, who were the founders of the meatpacking plant, because I have a presentation in 2 weeks, and I've got to add some additional information. But one really nice thing is with PEDCO, what we're trying to do is get the city to actually identify and really honor content creation as an industry sector, because it is the fastest growing industry in the world. There's no reason why Pueblo can't take advantage of that. So these teams here, we've just got incredible resources. So they're just making my life a lot easier because they've been doing it for a hell of a lot longer. But with the resources and the funding that's now available, I think we're at a really interesting place to make Pueblo a real thought leader in content creation and creating some amazing jobs, which are really, I'm just looking forward to it. So I'm going to pass it on to Sam and to Justin, and I think, Justin, you need my mic.
I need the mic. Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. Gregory's been doing such a great job with this series, and thanks for the privilege of being part of it. So yes, shout out and applause for Gregory. So I want to just raise the intellectual bar just a bit and start out. Oh, yeah. How did that work for you?
Hit present again, Scott.
Here it comes. Wait for it. And now if I press the right button.
Down.
Well, that's what I did the first time. Here.
Told you. There you go.
Wait for it. It's coming. You want to be my operator? Oh, there it is. Raising the intellectual bar. If you've never had children in your home, you might not get this, but if you have, you should. Let me try it again. Yeah, just press it harder.
Just down.
Okay, so this reminds me of a joke. Did you hear about the 2 television antennas that fell in love and got married? No, the wedding wasn't much, but the reception was excellent. Okay, now that we're all warmed up, but seriously, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Oh, I can do this, I'm sure. I'm sure I can do this. Scott, how do you feel about advancing slides for me? All right. So thanks for coming out and supporting storytellers. Actually, it should be on a black slide, so maybe that's the problem. But I don't know why I didn't advance the next one. Since Gregory launched this series with his view of the seamy underbelly of Pueblo in the early 1900s, it's been off to a great start. Tonight, Justin, Bregar, and I, and his parents, by the way, are right here. I just want to point them out. We want to tell you the truth, and his wife. They're all right here. Justin and I want to tell you the truth about documentary filmmaking. I'm going to start by talking about the concept and the notion of truth as it relates to documentary, and then Justin is going to take the second half and give you a peek under the hood about the documentary production process. Last week, our colleague, Jane Frazier, talked to us about why makers are such an important part of the history here in Pueblo. And she asks us to ask ourselves, what do we make? What do you make? And I had to think about that for a while. What do I make? And I like to think that with my 30-some years, 36-plus years of university teaching, that I've made connections with students which somehow enrich their lives. But on a more tangible level, one thing that I make is documentary films. So I guess that's my answer to Jane when she asked me, what do you make? I guess it's documentary films. Most recently, I, along with my colleague Justin Bregar and a host of very talented filmmakers that I have the privilege of calling friends, including Scott Jones, who's already been shouted out tonight, who's directing the live stream, and Ken Shaka, one of the owners here of the Senate. Together we made an hour-long documentary, historical documentary about the Great Pueblo Flood. I hope most of you have had a chance to see it. If not, you can find it on the Mountain PBS website or on YouTube, where it is approaching 40,000 views. When you make a historical documentary film, truth matters. The next slide, I think, is a Venn diagram. Oh, you're so much better at that than I am. I don't know. I made this Venn diagram a couple of years ago, and I just went in and relabeled and modified it a little bit to kind of show the relationship of, in this case, truth, lies, and opinion. And I put documentary films right at the very center because I think documentaries have all of these components on some level. Anytime an artist or a craftsperson creates anything, anytime we make something, including a story, the creation falls somewhere on this continuum of truth. It may be a complete lie intended to deceive. It could be a one-sided pitch intending to persuade us, perhaps to buy something, or it could be an honest and transparent message approaching but never fully attaining truth. But most likely, that created artifact that we make when we create something falls somewhere in the middle. So I'd like to spend the first 20 minutes of our time tonight unpacking the idea of truth in documentary filmmaking, what is possible and why it matters. So let me begin. I think we can go to the next one, which is just a black screen. So consider the following questions. Is the RMPBS documentary, The Great Pueblo Flood, a truthful expression of the history of an event that happened 100 years ago? Does it accurately capture and portray the nuance of the setting, the context, and the events that unfolded over a several-day period in June of 1921? And does the interpretation of events as expressed by the historians, scholars, and second-person witness or interviewees, people that we interviewed who had parents or grandparents who witnessed the flood, does it align with the alleged irrepressible arc of truth? And next slide, Dr. King. As Dr. Martin Luther King once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. While researching and writing this film, I asked myself the question, does our film contribute to the arc of the historical record that bends towards truth? I would like to answer yes in the affirmative, but I think that's the question for us to consider tonight. Next slide, which I think is just black again. Okay. One of the most difficult decisions when making a documentary is deciding what to put in and what to leave out. You can do harm to the truth by adding something that is not factually accurate, or you can do harm to the truth by leaving out an important detail, a sin of omission, if you will. So one of the stories about the 1921 flood that did not make it into our hour-long documentary was the story of E.E. Withers. Ernest E. Withers was a prominent Pueblo businessman. And on the night of June 6th, so just a couple of nights after the flood hit, he was driving downtown to look at the damage that had been caused. And he was shot and killed in his car. According to newspaper reports, Withers either was or wasn't complying with an order to halt when he was shot. And he was most probably shot by a member of the National Guard who was ordered to shoot looters on sight. His son, Granville Withers, was in the car with him at the time when he was shot. And no one was charged in his death. And Justin and I went back and forth, whether we should include this episode in the documentary. Part of it was deciding if we include it, what do we take out to make room for it? Which is, again, even when you have an hour to tell a story, there's so many potential stories to tell that, you have to decide what to leave in, what to take out. So I just want you for now to remember the name E.E. Withers and his son, Granville Withers, because they're going to come up again later in my presentation. But before we do that, let's review a bit of the history of visual storytelling format we refer to as documentary film, so that we can better understand the role that documentary filmmakers have in shaping our understanding and expectations of truth as a worthy and approachable goal. Before filmmaking was photography, and the history of photography has its own complicated relationship with the truth, which unfortunately we don't have time for here tonight. But we do have, next slide, here is a picture that is believed to be the first photograph to capture a human form, and you have to look carefully to see it. There's two human figures down, there they are, circled by the green laser. It's a boot black and his customer on the street, and this was created in 1838 in France, but to be honest, this is not a truthful photograph. And you might say, well, why? What's not truthful about it? What's not truthful is actually the sidewalks and streets actually had a lot more people in it than just those two that are visible. But the state of photography at the time, this was a 7-minute long exposure. The only people who show up are the two people who he had asked to stay stationary during that time that he made the photo. So is it a real photo? Well, yeah, but it's not really true to what actually was there and captured. A more recent example of a photograph that captures a human form is, for me, quintessentially an example of a picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a young Afghan girl who just deplaned in Belgium after being evacuated from Kabul. Something inside of me, something on a very visceral level, looks at this photo and says, that is truthful. That is literally full of truth. It captures so much about the state of the world today. I mean, even the pandemic is represented there. Her mother, I'm assuming that's her mother, has a face mask on. Probably all of their possessions are in her backpack that she's carrying. But the young girl has an indomitable spirit. I mean, it's that whole notion of what is true about the human spirit and the desire for freedom. It's captured in that photograph. Next slide. So a few decades after the first photograph was made, motion picture photography was accidentally invented when Edward Muybridge resolved to settle a $25,000 bet, and that's a lot of money in the day, as to whether, when a horse gallops, whether all 4 feet leave the ground. A series of tripwires were connected to about a dozen or so cameras that were set up at a local racetrack. And it turns out that all 4 feet do leave the ground. Oh, well, I think 2 or 3. I was going to say 3, but anyway, yes. At some point, photographic evidence. But this was, suddenly people realized a series of still photos can represent motion. And if you view them back in a way that captures that, you can actually capture and replay motion. Anyway, so early motion pictures were used just to document the mundane. Next, we have a slide of workers. It's actually just a frozen, yeah, it's actually a clip here. This is the Lumiere brothers in France, workers leaving the factory. That's it. That's the whole film, workers leaving the factory. Next one is arrival of a train, equally as dramatic. This actually happens to be a 4K digital recreation of the original film footage that was shot in 1896, again by the Lumiere brothers. The goal was to capture reality in a series of still photos that, when displayed or projected onto a screen, recreated the event as it happened. That short film of a train arriving at a station, people literally jumped out of their seats to avoid being struck by the oncoming train when they looked at the film. I mean, yeah. I mean, think about it. If you've never seen a motion picture and now you're sitting in front of a big, blank screen or canvas or whatever, and you see a train coming at you, what are you going to do? People literally jumped out of their seats. All right. In the next few years of the 20th century, early 20th century, filmmakers began to use a new medium to tell stories of their own making. So, A Trip to the Moon by Frenchman Georges Méliès. It's science fiction, and it's an amazing film. You should actually look it up on YouTube and watch it. But it's incredibly hokey, but it's incredible in terms of the technique that they use to create this motion picture film. And then the next one, The Great Train Robbery by American Edwin Porter. a Western with actors, you know, in a gun battle, and at one point the gunfighter points his gun right into the camera lens, so all of a sudden, again, you, the audience, are presented with this idea that now you're brought into the scene. But it became a form of theater. But it wasn't long before filmmakers quickly turned their attention back to true stories. So one of the first feature-length films, well, actually the first feature-length film to receive the label of documentary was Robert Flaherty's Nanook of the North. And there's the poster for it. It was released in 1922. A gripping story about the Inuit Indians of northern Canada. Flaherty described them as, quote, fearless, lovable, happy-go-lucky Eskimos, end quote. And he was portraying their fight for survival against some of the harshest conditions on Earth. The person who came up with the label of documentary was British filmmaker John Grierson, and he defined documentary as the creative treatment of actuality. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this notion of what actuality is, and it's the creative treatment that makes it interesting and engaging and compelling. But the question remains, just how creative can we be with actualities, with artifacts, if you will, historical evidence, and not do harm to the truth? So that's kind of the core question I want us to answer tonight. So let's take a few minutes to explore Nanook. Let's just point out some of the things that aren't perhaps objectively accurate about the portrayal. Nanook's name was actually, and oh Lord help me here, Alakagialak. He was actually a hunter that Flaherty had befriended, and he asked him to play this role of Nanook. And I'm kind of glad that he did, because I would hate to have to pronounce that name every time I talk about this film. Nanook's wife, Nyla, as portrayed in the film, was actually Flaherty's common-law wife, with whom he had fathered, they've had a son together. So again, Nanook wasn't really Nanook, but a person playing him. His wife, Nyla, was actually Flaherty's wife, the filmmaker's wife. And then the next shot is a walrus hunt. And at the time when this was filmed, they had rifles, and normally at this point they would shoot the walrus and drag it up on the beach. In fact, Flaherty is over there hand cranking the camera, and there's a rifle right next to him. And when you watch the film, you actually see Nanook. He's the one in the back. He's constantly turning over, looking over his shoulder and yelling something. There's no sound, so you don't hear what he's saying. But he's talking to Flaherty, and what he's telling him is, please stop filming, pick up the rifle, and shoot the walrus. Because they're in, they're in a life and death struggle trying to pull this walrus up onto the beach. They eventually do, by the way. They're successful. But the point is, Flaherty wanted to show the struggle and the harshness of the living conditions, and he wanted to show it the way it was, not the way it was at the moment, which would have involved shooting the walrus. I like Roger Ebert's quote. He said in defense of the manipulation, if you stage a walrus hunt, it still involves hunting a walrus, and the walrus hasn't seen the script. I'm going to go to another clip here from the documentary, and this is actual video, and watch the audio levels here. If you'll play this. This is, I'm going to talk over this. This shows Nanook and his family waking up in the morning inside their igloo, and but the problem is an igloo would have been too small and too dark to film. So Flaherty asked them to build an igloo that had an open side that he could film through. But of course, it let in all the cold air. So here they are, even colder than normal conditions, you know, changing the baby's sealskin diaper, getting some food. Oh, you didn't see Nyla was actually chewing on Nanook's boot, so it was flexible enough so he could pull them on over his feet. So if you're not an Inuit wife, thank your lucky stars. And then he has a little fresh seal blubber for breakfast. So next frame, I think, just goes to black. So what do we do about reenactments, embellishments, creative treatment of actuality that we use to make the story more engaging, more interesting, perhaps? When do they become a distraction? When do they actually take us away from the truth and the authenticity of the story? Is a docudrama even a thing, or is it a mashup that doesn't belong? So I've been using this term actuality let me just list some of the things that we consider what we considered for our making of our historical documentary. What are the component parts? So first would be newspaper accounts, and there's a quote by Phil Graham, publisher of the Washington Post. He said, "Journalism is the first rough draft of history." And I love that because if you think about it, journalists on the ground, whether they were writing 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or last week, they are watching things unfold, they're interviewing eyewitnesses, and they're recording it, and it becomes part of the official record, if you will, that becomes our history. So we went through archives of Colorado newspapers, looking at what they had to say about the flood, and drew from those archives because, again, a very rich trove of wonderful information. Next, photographs, and we had literally thousands of photographs to look through. All the local museums, the Heritage Museum, the library, El Pueblo, and then John Wark made his collection available to us. I mean, we just had gobs of photographs and going through and picking the best ones. And I love this quote, who's actually from a filmmaker, French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard said, "Photography is truth, and then cinema is truth at 24 frames or times per second, because film is exposed in the camera at 24 frames every second. So it's basically a photograph every 24th of a second." So his point is, a photograph is truthful, and then filmmaking is just truth at that rate of speed. So, which reminds me of another wonderful artifact that we had, our actuality that we had to use for the making of our documentary, and that was made available to us because two filmmakers from Denver happened to be in Pueblo shooting an industrial film the weekend that the flood happened. When they saw the flood, they turned their camera on the flood and they exposed about 600 feet of 16 millimeter film. A couple of days later, they were able to get out. They took it up to Denver. They developed the film, and they actually screened it for audiences. So audiences in Denver were actually seeing film footage of the Pueblo flood just days after it happened. But that film exists at the Pueblo Library. We were able to have it digitized at fairly decent quality. I mean, again, you're talking about a 100-year-old piece of film, which probably wasn't even stored in very good condition for those 100 years. But that made up part of our raw material from which our documentary was made. And that was, what did it end up being, 2.5 minutes worth?
Yeah, something like that.
Of course, now it would be digital audio and video files, email, social media posts. I mean, imagine what historians and documentarians are going to be working with 100 years from now. Eyewitness accounts would be a form of actuality, right? People who were there and saw it happen. Of course, we don't have any of those from a 100-year-old event. Certainly no one old enough to remember anything still living, or at least we don't know of them if they are. But we do have a number of secondhand accounts. So people like John Korber, Therese Simony, several others in the film heard stories from their parents and grandparents told about the Pueblo flood, and that became raw material for us, actuality for us that we could creatively then weave into a story. And then expert testimony, the historians, the professors, the gentleman who is a train buff. We had people who had expertise and knew about the Pueblo flood and how it affected those particular components. So next, I think, is actually just a black screen and then one more. So earlier I mentioned the story of E.E. Withers, and now, like Paul Harvey, I want to give you the rest of the story. Let me see how I'm doing time-wise. I don't want to cut into Justin's time. For those of you familiar with the Pueblo flood, you know the story of the Mountain State telephone operators who stayed at their post or even came back to their post to make calls to warn people downriver of the coming flood. You know, the flood was on its way, perhaps saving hundreds of lives. Some 15 years after that, Monogram Pictures, a Hollywood film studio, released a film, Telephone Operator, a film with the following description. Next slide. Have you seen that film? No. Oh, don't give it away. Okay. I should have blacked out his name. This is the tagline for it. A telephone operator, I think I have it on the next slide, covering for a friend's fling, finds herself in the middle of a major disaster when the city is hit by a big flood and her switchboard is the center of communications. So this is in the public domain now. So we found this in the National Archives. So we downloaded it and incorporated it. My next slide here actually has, go ahead and hit it again. And I'm going to play a clip from our documentary.
Just down the street from Union Depot was the Mountain State Telephone and Telegraph Office. As the floodwaters continued to rise, the staff of young women stayed at their posts, a simple act of duty that may have saved many lives.
Warn everybody. Get them out of the low country.
The phone company was on D Street, so they're just a block off of the river. It had been raining all afternoon.
I had been working for the Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph Company for about 2 years. When I heard the flood was coming, I was off duty on a date. But I rushed over to our office because I knew I would be needed. Sure enough, we started calling people who lived near the river and downstream.
So that short clip contains several different things that we pulled together. One was a script that the telephone operators, that was a recreated script from newspaper articles and letters and things that were brought together and turned into the script in the voice of one of the operators who was present. Then there was also footage from the Hollywood film. And then there was also real footage from the filmmakers who were in Pueblo in 1921. And then there were sound effects, and there was music. So that is an example of a creative treatment of actuality, but some of which is, in fact, fictional content, right? Does it do justice to the story of what happened in Pueblo in 1921, or is it playing a little fast and loose with the truth, if you will? Anyway, that's, again, I'm not providing answers, I'm just providing questions. But I do so I do want you to notice the stars of the film. So as was pointed out just a moment ago, the female lead was Judith Allen. Apparently she was a big deal. But the male lead was Grant Withers, also known as Granville Withers. Yes, that Granville Withers, next slide, the one from Pueblo, Colorado, who tragically lost his father when he was in the car with his father. His father was shot. He was probably 15 or 16 years old. He ended up leaving Pueblo, went to Hollywood, actually made it as an actor. What do you think the chances are that this Hollywood film made in 1937 maybe drew a little bit from the story from the 1921 flood in Pueblo? Yeah, I think maybe 100% chance of that, right? All right. Actually, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop there so we have some time for Q&A. So I'm going to let you jump ahead to Justin's part. You want me to run that for you?
In all of the...
Okay.
I got it, Sam. I can do this. I can do this. All right. So Sam was very philosophical about his portion, and my portion is going to be a little more technical. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we made it, how we came up with the idea, kind of the process, pitching it to Rocky Mountain PBS, things like that. So
I would just say we're yin and yang, okay?
So right, exactly. It makes a good team.
And we've been together a long time. He was a student of mine in the late 90s, and then we became colleagues in the late aughts. For 5 years, we were professors together, and we still work together to this day. So
yeah, works out pretty well. All right. So first of all, where'd the there we go. All right. So I kind of came up with the idea. It just popped into my head one day that the 100th anniversary of the flood was coming up the next year. This is kind of late summer of 2020. And so I went and talked to Sam, and I said, hey, Sam, what do you think about doing something for the 100th anniversary of the flood? Maybe a historical documentary. He thought that was a good idea, I think. At least he humored me when I pitched it to him. But and we kind of together talked about it a little bit and decided it would actually fit really well inside of a Rocky Mountain PBS series that we both have watched quite extensively called Car Experience. So and Sam at the time knew the producer of that pretty well through the university and such. So we pitched it to Rocky Mountain PBS kind of in the fall of 2020, which wasn't great timing, but we'll kind of get to that in a minute. They thought it was a fantastic idea. They said, this is great. We want to show it on the actual date of the anniversary, but that's in season 8, and season 8 has been locked down, and there's no money. So they said, if this is going to happen, it kind of has to, we have to find the money for it. So that guy back there deserves a ton of the credit for that. Without Emery and his people, that would not have this thing would not have happened. But we approached a bunch of people for a while. I thought it wasn't going to actually happen. It was pretty. It kind of got started real slow, and then we got one really good-sized donation, and then all of a sudden, it was more than funded. So, and they basically told us kind of right up at the beginning, the amount of money that's raised is how long it's going to be. If we raise this amount of money, it can be a half an hour, which is the standard for a Colorado experience. And we really thought there was enough story here for an hour, and there's probably enough story for 2 hours, but I don't want to think about how much time that would have taken to actually cut. But anyway, we raised the money. The city of Pueblo, Pueblo County, Wilcox Wealth Management, I'm forgetting a bunch of people, Urban Renewal, everybody, the entire city of Pueblo kind of rallied behind this project as something they wanted to see made, and that's awesome. So, all right, so the crew. So then we had the money, and we had the green light, and it was Sam and I kind of at the beginning, and we needed a little bit of help, so we enlisted Scott. Scott's sitting back there, and Ken, who is not here, he's off in the hinterlands of New Mexico right now, doing some kind of shooting. But that's the crew in general, and there were a few other people. Jeff back there did a little bit of audio work for us. And a bunch of, and then a former student of both Sam and mine, who lives up in Evergreen, did all of our finish work and graphics. He's kind of a whiz at that kind of stuff. His name's Sean Ender. But this was the kind of the core crew for the shooting, and so we kind of started shooting. So the timeline was pretty tight. The funding, because it kind of took a little while for things to kind of get going, we didn't get a green light until kind of very late 2020, very early 2021. And at that point, we have a fixed end date at this point. This thing is going to air on June 3rd, regardless of what, you know, basically it needs to air on June 3rd. So we started shooting, and we kind of cheated a little bit. We started shooting significantly before the project was greenlit, and Sam and I kind of made this decision that we were going to make this thing whether Rocky Mountain PBS was going to pay us to make it and air it or not. So it kind of, so we cheated that a little bit, and we started doing interviews kind of in December. So we did 16 interviews total. So that's a pretty fair amount for this amount of thing. It took a lot of time. And the interviews kind of went all over the place. That's John Korber, and we shot him in the, John was great. He's probably the closest connection we have to someone who actually perished in the flood. His grandfather? Yeah, his grandfather perished in the flood. So that's John Korber at the Pueblo History Museum. The community really did a fantastic job of kind of opening all of these venues and gave us a lot of really cool places to shoot. There is Spencer Little, also in the Pueblo History Museum, talking about Lucky the Horse, which figures prominently in one section of the thing. And there's Scott running audio for me, and I was sitting on the ground. So, and this is another fantastic venue. That's Ken, and we were shooting at Pueblo Memorial Hall. So, fantastic spot to shoot. That's Wade Broadhead. He did a session on of the dig a few weeks ago. So, and then there's Scott sitting on the floor listening to audio, monitoring audio. And then that's Susan Adamich, also at the Pueblo History Museum. It's a great place. Has lots of places where you can kind of shoot and get things done. So, all right. So once the interviews were kind of done, they were all transcribed by Rocky Mountain PBS. And then Sam took those transcriptions and he wrote the script. So Sam was kind of the script guy, and I was the guy that sat behind the camera, and I also ended up editing this beast. So based on the interviews, he wrote the script, and we were a little over on time, about 45 minutes over on a 56-minute and 40-second, because an hour-long program is 56 minutes and 40 seconds for Rocky Mountain PBS. So we were way over. We had to cut a bunch of stuff out. One of the things that ended up on the cutting room floor was the Ernest Withers story, which both Sam and I really wanted to be in there, but there were other things that we wanted in there more. So that's kind of how that whole thing works. So once that was kind of done, and once we had scripts, the editing begins. This is kind of where I cut the whole thing at my house. And it was, because of the way Rocky Mountain PBS does it, I had to edit this in Premiere, which is not something I normally do, and I'm not a humongous fan, but we got it done. You can kind of see that is my laptop with the script, and that's the timeline, and that's a little tiny part of the timeline. So it ended up much, much larger than that. So editing was pretty tough because we had a lot of assets, just a ton of stuff to work with. Lots of interviews. Some of the interviews were well over an hour long, so a lot of stuff to kind of sort through. There are also 1,406 archival photos. No, that's the number of them in the project. Okay, so it was a lot of data wrangling that had to be done, and that's kind of the way it is with this type of project, with a historical documentary. So. The next thing we had to do, I kind of touched on this a little bit. I said the timing kind of was very bad. And the reason was we basically started shooting right when the city gets really brown and ugly. So we had to, and we were going to deliver it about a month after the city starts not looking brown and ugly. So we had to do some more shooting, outside B-roll stuff, drone shots, things like that. So. To kind of fill that stuff in there. And then delivery, well, you say it's done and you hand it off to Sean and he does his thing, but I talk to Sean kind of every day, and we made lots of changes, anyway, made lots of changes all the way up to pretty much like a week before it aired, when they had to jump it for air. So, all right, so then after that, so the documentary was kind of done. So Sam and I got to do a press tour. I unintentionally, I didn't tell him I was doing this, but I took all the outside of Pueblo stuff, so he had to take all the inside of Pueblo stuff, so I didn't have to watch myself on TV or anything. But the media kind of took pretty good notice of this. It was covered all over the place. So we also had a screening on the Riverwalk. Did anybody make it to that? So screening on the Riverwalk was the Wednesday before. This aired on a Thursday. June 3rd was a Thursday. So it aired on the Riverwalk on June 2nd. It was great. Like, I literally could not have wished for better weather and a better situation. The turnout was fantastic. Had free food trucks. It was really, really cool. Yeah, the Rawlings Foundation funded that almost completely, right? Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty neat. So you can see, like, this is the press conference. There's Sam right there. This is the press conference that was down on the Riverwalk. This is me on CBS 4 Denver, looking very grumpy. All of the screenshots that were sent to me, like somebody sent me a bunch of screenshots because they actually saw it on TV. All the screenshots, like, I look really, really mad. And which is weird because I wasn't, but so anyway, that was pretty cool. Yeah, so the screening was pretty awesome. We were kind of talking about what we should do for an event, and I'm like, I want to have it out on the Riverwalk. I want to have it out on the Riverwalk. And Rocky Mountain PBS said you can't have it anywhere inside, which is great because I think it would have ended up like in Memorial Hall if not. But man, Mother Nature knocked it out of the park for us. The weather was beautiful. It wasn't super hot. There was no rain. Nice, like, light clouds. It was beautiful. Very picturesque. So, all right. So, how many people in here have seen this thing already? All right, most of us. All right. Well, if you haven't seen it, you can go to this really long URL with weird thing, or you can just type in puebloflood.com, and that'll take you right to it too. So that'll take you to YouTube. You can watch it. It's a really, I think that's the last slide. Yeah, it's a really, it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I grew up here. I was born here, grew up here, and there's a lot of stuff I didn't know that that I learned, and it really makes you proud of the resilience of this community and kind of what this community is kind of all about. So I think at this point we're opening up to questions for 10 minutes or so. All right.
And we have two. Thanks, Emery, for bringing down two Colorado Experience. What do you call these glasses? They have a name. Pint glasses. And there's also on each of the tables a coaster. Anyone feel free to take that with you as well.
Oh, this one here?
That one. There you go.
So Rocky Mountain PBS.
Swag.
The swag, yeah.
Or did anyone get
Questions? Questions in the audience?
Oh, we're going to go to questions.
Do we have any questions?
I'll ask one. So what were you most surprised, or what did you learn that you didn't realize about the flood?
Oh, that's easy for me. Mine was the way that the flood, getting permission from the state legislature to build a levee, to create a conservancy district, your conservancy district, and build a levee required that they did a little horse trading, a little backroom dealing with Colorado legislators who wanted to build the Moffett Tunnel to allow rail traffic to go straight west from Denver instead of coming first south to Pueblo and then going west. So Pueblo made that Faustian bargain to get the conservancy district and the levee, which protected us from future flooding, but it had the end result over time of rerouting so much of the train traffic that formerly went through Pueblo now did not and went straight west from Denver, and that really shaped the future for Pueblo. That was the thing for me.
Yeah, and this is related to that, but I'll go back a little further. And the thing that kind of surprised me was how big of a deal Pueblo was prior to the flood. And prior to that horse trading, where they had to basically give away a ton of prominence and economic oomph to basically rebuild the city. Because I was born here in the late 70s, so Pueblo was always the third largest city at best. Colorado Springs passed somewhere in the early 70s. So it was very strange to me that Pueblo was the second largest city, had political power rivaling that of Denver, and this flood was a massive deal on a national scale. The thing that kind of struck me was, and I've got a poster print of it because I ordered it from the New York Times, but the headline, the top story headline in the New York Times for June 5th, 1921 was about the Pueblo flood. I mean, it literally made the top of the New York Times, the paper of record for the United States of America. And they didn't refer to it as Pueblo, Colorado, it was Pueblo. So there's a ton of prominence that you don't really, kind of growing up here later in the 20th century, you don't realize what a big deal this city was at that time. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Do you plan on making another documentary about Pueblo? And if so, what would the subject be?
I can't give away all my secrets. I don't know. You want to answer that one?
Well, I know Justin. Yeah, whether we can make a promise or not, I don't know. But I know Justin already has like at least a half dozen great ideas for documentaries about Pueblo. So here's the deal, and you need to take Emery aside before he leaves tonight and put a little pressure on him.
He's leaving now.
Don't worry, the doors are locked.
Colorado Experience, I think, typically has around 10, 12 episodes a year. I'm not sure. They might have half that many for the upcoming year, which means it's going to be very competitive to get a story, on Colorado Experience. Justin, I'll let you take. What's your top?
I'll get the mic so it goes out over the live stream. There's a lot of options, but one of the things I think needs to be made, because a lot of people don't realize this, is it has to do with Water Tower Place or the Knuckles Meatpacking Plant. Back in the 20s, it was run president and vice president / treasurer by two women. Please do not put me up on the screen. It was run by two women, Marion and Della Knuckles. So primarily kind of by accident, because their father passed away and there were no male heirs to kind of take on the, but that's a fascinating story. And they're also very fascinating people too. Like there's a lot of side story there too, but it's that's kind of the one kind of at the top. But I have a whole list of them.
And I'm actually going out to meet with the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren this weekend again. And my presentation in 3 weeks will be on 30 years of private letters between those two women. So it's an extraordinary story. And when I meet with the family, they have certain stories that they know, but then they don't know all of the Pueblo story. And when we meet, we kind of fill in all of those pieces. So I really hope that we'll be able to, because I think it's one of the great stories. And I know that as well as we did with our fundraising, Emery, we're going to have a lot of people standing up. We did an incredible job fundraising for this Pueblo flood documentary. So I think Pueblo deserves at least one episode a year, at least one episode a year.
Spoiler alert for season 2 of The Dig, but also the state hospital.
Oh, yeah, that'd be a good one.
And yeah, just a precursor, spoiler alert, that's all I'm gonna say.
Hey, first of all, I bow down to you guys because really great job. And also, I don't know if you all realize, to make a documentary film in the amount of time that you did it and do it well is to really be commended. And I'm telling you, I know y'all were doing some serious work. So that's great. Now I forgot my question. No, actually I want to know, what was it like? I find it interesting because there's different things in history in Pueblo that have sparked me a bit. I always was curious about the Mineral Palace. Why was it the flood for you? That's...
Well, I think the obvious one was the convenience of the 100-year anniversary coming up is what really got us going on it. Justin, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I kind of like to do this stuff on things I don't know a ton about because it's a learning experience. Yeah, I think what really sparked it was the 100th anniversary, and then that's also, because these things don't get made in a vacuum. They need support and they need nurturing and things like that. So that was a good hook to get support from the community and things like that. And the community absolutely did support this to a breathtaking degree. Like I would have never thought the amount of money that would have been raised and the activities that happened around it, and like that would have, it was very, it was weird for me. It kind of took me by surprise. But yeah, I mean that's probably why did we choose the flood? It's mostly a timing thing, I think, and it was a story that needed to be told too, because it's something that's not. To a certain degree, the number of people that have come up to me and said, I didn't know I knew there was a flood in 1921, but I didn't know it was a big deal. And it was a big deal. I mean, it gets overshadowed in history to a certain degree because they didn't have records of how many people died and things like that. Like the low end of the estimates that we hear is about 150 people, okay, perished, okay. 150 people. So that's the low end. Like that's basically the floor. I don't know of anybody who says it was less than that. That would make it the worst natural disaster in Colorado history if the records backed it up. But the records aren't there to back it up, so the worst natural disaster in Colorado history is the Big Thompson flood up north. So it's a much larger deal than a lot of people give it credit for, and it started to fade a little bit in people's memories. So it's always fun to bring that back into prominence. So.
And how many Puebloans have seen the big mural on the side of the building, which was the saddle factory of Lucky the horse, and had no idea why is there a horse up in a tree, right?
No, that's an amazing story. In fact, when I was at Central Plaza, when I had the gallery, when Matt Taylor, Refik, and also Mike Strashino finished that mural, a 92-year-old woman was walking down in front of my gallery, and she broke down and she started crying. And I didn't know why. I was looking from the outside of my gallery, and I saw this woman. I went out and I helped her. And from my gallery, you could just see Lucky in the tree. And she was crying because as a small girl, she remembered when Lucky was actually one of those mannequins for not only R.T. Fraser's in the saddle manufacturer, but then later it was on Union also. And of course, during the fire, the firemen took Lucky out first before they went to go and get the fire out. So it's an amazing story. But Kennedy Pugh, who just asked the last question, another amazing documentarian, he has a documentary about his father, Kilroy the boy soldier, who at the age of 15 went to war. And it's an amazing story. So if you have never seen that documentary, and it's an extraordinary documentary. So I have some fun things to say because, well, first of all, thank you. I mean, Sam and Justin, this has been incredible. I mean, I grew up on a movie set in Southern California. So for me, film has just been, you know, I walk out my house and it's just what I'm used to. So this is extraordinary because storytelling, I think, at the end of the day, is the one thing that is so essential for just building community, no matter where you are. And when you can break bread, thanks to Pueblo Dragon 2, those two things, that's the way to start. So first of all, next week at the Dig, we've got Kennedy and Roxy Pinelli, who are going to be doing a really interesting, it'll be very different from all of the other digs, but we're gonna have magicians, performing artists, we're gonna have musicians, we're gonna have people singing. So it will be very much like a speakeasy, like a cabaret. So that is going to be, Kennedy is going to be leading that effort next week here at the Dig. And then, yeah. And at the same table, we have Rosina Sontag, who is going to be leading the Dig after that. And I was very fortunate to do the Ghost Walk twice. The first was when I opened up the tunnels at Kadoya Gallery, and that was just extraordinary because it was the first time that the Ghost Walk actually went into a building, because usually it's a performer, an artist, doing some type of storytelling and acting, you know, out in front of a building. But then I got to be the founder of Summit Brick, Joseph Welty, years later in the Ghost Walk, and I'll never forget standing there one night and looking at the back, and I had 4 generations of Weltys from Summit Brick. And actually, when it was finished, they told me I could come to any family reunion. So it's an amazing story. So Rosina is going to be doing the Dig after that, which will be on the Ghost Walk. So if you have any questions for Rosina, she can answer those. And then I will be doing one more.
And I should have given Rosina credit. She was the one instrumental in developing that script for the telephone operator.
Yeah, so the telephone operator portion of what just Sam was, Rosina was really instrumental in making that happen for the documentary for Rocky Mountain PBS for the Great Pueblo Flood. But I will be following Rosina in doing the whole talk on Marion and Della Knuckles. And I'm going to dig into their whole story. And it'll be the first time I've ever done that. So that's going to be really interesting for me. And I feel very emotional because I'm kind of the adopted great-grandchild of the family. And I wrote the section in the book at Roselawn Cemetery, because they're all buried at Roselawn Cemetery. And even their ex-husbands were exhumed and moved out to Roselawn. Oh, wow. So it's an interesting story. But I feel very lucky that they feel comfortable with me looking at 3 decades of these personal letters between Marion and Della. And Della was a Broadway star, and Marion stayed here. I mean, the stories are extraordinary. For 1928, as Justin mentioned, I think it's worthy of Rocky Mountain PBS. I think it's worthy of a Netflix series, for that matter. So And then our very last dig for this season, and then we're going to add one more, hopefully, about the Senate Bar and the history of this building. But Reagan Foster, who is professor of journalism at CSUP, is going to be doing a talk on news as a community asset. So we have some really big news for October 6th. So if there are no more questions, I want to thank everyone. And I know that Sam and Justin will be available. And you can hunt down Rosina and Kennedy if you want to know what's coming up in the next few weeks. So thank you, everyone, for a great evening.